halfway through.
Hey, how are you? Yeah, it went great. Thank you for arranging that. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Did you, are you waiting for me? Mr.
All right, it's going to take you
sorry.
15 minutes to get the scarf off.
You need a scarf reel.
Okay, we're ready. It's 3 o'clock, and the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission will start its meeting, regularly scheduled meeting for 11 January 2019, I think it is. Mr. Bunky,
All
would
right,
you do a...
I will call the roll.
Oh, and let me announce, if anybody hadn't seen it, we're being live streamed today as an experiment.
Okay.
Okay, so watch your language.
Yeah.
Language smile.
And Ann will be surveying to see how many people are actually watching us to see if we get an Emmy or not. Okay, so just wanted to let people know that we're going to be live streamed. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Trunzo,
Present.
Mr. Perry,
Present.
okay, Mr. Weber,
Present.
Ms. Lucier,
Present.
Mr. Strange,
Here.
Ms. Gay,
Here.
Chair Mellon,
Is here.
myself, Paul Hubbard is not with us today.
I don't think he's going to make it today.
Okay, all right, so we have a quorum.
Thank you. And also note that the city manager is here, and Mr. Mandelis,
Mr. Molina,
Mr. Molina.
okay.
Very good. Thank you. Verification of meeting notice. Ann?
The agenda was posted at City Hall and on the city portal on January 4th, and it was also sent out to subscribers on January 4th. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Approval of minutes, we actually have, we are caught up on minutes, believe it or not. So let's have a vote on each one. Let's take the regular meeting minutes held on September 14th, 2018. I've read them, hopefully other people have read them. They were distributed earlier this week. Can I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes for September 14th, 2018. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Those are approved. Let's take the meeting of November 9th, 2018. That was also a regular meeting. I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes for November 9th, 2018. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And that carries. The joint meeting of Board of Commissioners, which was held between ourselves and the Board of Commissioners, was on December 14th, 2018. I'll take a motion, and you can't, you weren't there.
Here.
Okay, so can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve minutes December 14th.
And we have a second? Second has been, motion been made and seconded to approve the joint special meeting minutes of Board of Commissioners, held with the Board of Commissioners on December 14th. All in favor, say aye.
Mr. Chairman, could I
Yes.
suggest one little change, please?
I beg your pardon?
Could I suggest one little change, please?
Discuss with Ann. Yeah.
Oh,
Now, go ahead. Yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
no, I just think that,
Speak into your microphone.
I just think that in fairness, at the end of the description of what took place at the meeting where it says that discussion ensued, I realize there's an et cetera at the end, but I do think that the minutes should reflect that several of the Planning Commission members did express some concern about the pace at which the CDP is progressing, and in particular, the timing of meetings when the public will be providing input to us,
And the number of meetings.
and the number of meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was discussed. Can we add that in, Ann? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, with those, anyone opposed to that being added in? Okay, in light of that, let's have a vote now with the amendment made by Mr. Perry. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain?
I'm abstaining.
Okay, and I vote aye. Thank you. Correspondence? Do we, I don't think we have anything
Well, we have there was that one letter about the CDP.
from Stan Heisler?
Yeah.
Stan Heisler's letter, yes.
Yeah. came
and which was in the newspaper today.
Right.
Okay, and was actually handed out, I think, a week or so ago also.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and I have a copy of it here. So
Do you have the December minutes? Were you signing them?
I signed them.
Oh, okay,
I've taken care of them.
that's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, very good.
New business. Old business, we have none. New business, we're into a sketch plan review for application 1218-03 for the property located at 330, anomaly 330 Rehoboth Avenue, also known as Sussex County Tax Parcel 334-14.17-139.00. The proposed use is for a 4-story hotel building with areas for dining and retail at the southeast corner of the intersection of Rehoboth Avenue and State Road. The site is a split zone with approximately 23,067 square feet of C1 commercial property along Rehoboth Avenue and approximately 19,425 square feet of R1 residential along State Road. The sketch plan review has been requested by David Hutt Esquire of the law firm of Morris James, Wilson, Albrecht, Bayard, LLP, on behalf of Limitless Development Construction Consulting, 2, LLC, with a long-term 99-year tenant. They are apparently a long-term 99-year tenant of the property. The property is owned by, I guess, the estate of J.J. Stein III Incorporated. Is that correct, Mr. Hutt? Is that? Yes? Yeah, okay. Before we start, let me just, for everybody present, which is mainly you guys, just talk a little bit about the project concept review. Article 7 of our code, 236, the subdivision of land and site plan review code. Article 7 is a site plan review, and 236-31 describes the project concept review, and let me just go over what it says so that we sort of understand where we are. Prospective applicants with projects requiring Planning Commission approval may request project concept review and discussion by the Planning Commission. The purpose of the project concept review and discussion is to provide the Planning Commission with the opportunity at one or more meetings to informally review the applicant's potential development before the applicant really commits substantial time and expense preparing a formal site plan for the proposed development. And I would also mention that in contrast to a normal site plan review or other matters of subdivision that come before us, there is no need in this case to be code compliant, okay, whereas there is for the formal site plan review. Prospective applicants may request project concept review by submitting the following materials for to the Planning Commission at least 28 days before a regular meeting of the Planning Commission, and I believe that was done. Sketch map of the proposed development that shows its location, surrounding properties, roads, proposed layout, and the development is platted from a deed or tax map and/or a survey and at a scale that assures legibility, and any additional information that will provide the Planning Commission with an understanding of the impact of the project on the factors of, that are cited in the main part of the site plan review, which is 236-30. The Planning Commission and the applicant will review and discuss any issues or concerns related to the proposed project. And following the project concept review and discussion, the Planning Commission will provide non-binding, it says written comments, but we can also do it orally. We'll decide on that later. And suggestions based on its experience, knowledge, and technical assistance and public comments. The Planning Commission shall take no action to approve or deny the concept or any other details of a proposed development at the project concept review and discussion. So that's sort of our game plan. Before we start that, I should have done this earlier, but Lee, would you address an
sure.
issue for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention,
Speak into your microphone, please.
I just wanted to mention that Mr. Hutt has represented me in the past personally on an issue with the Board of Adjustment, and his firm has represented me on other prior zoning issues. With respect to Mr. Hutt, it was a one-time representation, and it was, how long ago was that, David? A year ago? At least a year ago, and there has been no further discussions about it since then. And I mean, the case went to the Board of Adjustment and was resolved. It's not ongoing, but I just thought it is important that I disclose that.
Okay. It's part of our attention to ethics, and it's more important to get this out in the open and public discussion. Are there any members that have any objections to continuing and with Lee? Normally, if there was a conflict of interest, you would recuse yourself and not be present for the discussions.
It's resolved, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Mandelis, any concerns?
No issue whatsoever.
Okay, okay,
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
it has occurred to me that a law firm that I used for estate planning purposes merged with Morrison James a while back. And although the person who was primarily responsible for handling my estate planning work did not become a member of that firm, other members of his firm did. I just wanted to be sure that that was also disclosed.
okay.
There's no current
Any
representation.
objections
however.
at this time, Mr. Mandelis?
No issue from on the legal side, no.
Okay. This is incestuous Delaware,
Hello. Hello, welcome to Sussex County, right?
somewhat. Okay, thank you both for making us aware of those potential conflicts. Mr. Hott? What we're going to do, normally we would, for a normal subdivision of land, we would normally hear from the building inspector, his report, his evaluation. But since this is really a sketch review, it's sort of an open discussion, I think what we'd like to do is hear from the applicant first. Tell us what you are trying to do, what you would like to do, what you think you can do, et cetera. And we'll interact with you, and if there's any members of the public, we'll get some response from the public. And then we will ask the building inspector to give us his impression, at least of what has been submitted to date, and whether it's code compliant, not code compliant, et cetera. Okay? So have at it.
Good afternoon. I don't think it's any secret at this point what my name is, but for the record, my name is David Hutt. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Morris James, and this afternoon I am representing the tenant, the long-term tenant, 99-year tenant of the property, which I think you're all familiar with, at the intersection of Rehoboth Avenue and State Road. And that tenant is Limitless Development Construction Consulting 2, LLC. With me is the principal, Don Lockwood. He is the principal of that entity. Also with me as part of this project team is Carlton Savage with Scaled Engineering. He's the engineer for the project. And sitting next to him is Bruce Bonita, and he is the architect for the project. As was indicated by the chairman a moment ago, this is a conceptual review being undertaken by the Planning Commission, and we appreciate your time this afternoon to give us your thoughts and feedbacks on this project as it's at its very preliminary stages. We've actually spoken with several officials in the town about this project informally, and some of the guidance we received was that this would be a great process for us to undertake. As you know, if you looked at the request or the application to have this conceptual review, there is at least one unique feature about this property that we will probably have to spend some time this afternoon discussing, not to mention, of course, actually just the site itself and the concept of this hotel. The location, as was indicated a moment ago, is along Rehoboth Avenue. Obviously, you come around the circle if you're headed towards the ocean, and it's almost immediately on your right where State Road intersects with this. The property was most recently known as the site of Ocean Atlantic Sotheby's, but of course, for anybody who's been in Rehoboth for many years, it was probably better known throughout its history as the Seahorse Restaurant. And obviously, that has not been the case for many years, as I believe Ocean Atlantic was there for more than a decade. But for some reason, sometimes iconic restaurants like that hang with people more than remembering that there was a real estate firm or some other type of use of the property. Due to the age and condition of the building, it is in a state and condition where the best use of that building at this point would be to replace that building with something else, to tear it down and to put something else in its place. Of course, one of the first steps that occurs when somebody looks to determine what could I possibly do with this piece of property is you have a survey performed of the property and lay out, of course, the property boundaries and show all the various improvements that are on the site. What you have on the screens in front of you and what was tab 1, hopefully you all got a copy of the exhibit notebook that we're going to be relying upon this afternoon and referencing a number of times. But this is a survey of the property. Of course, as you're looking at it, of course, Rehoboth Avenue is at the bottom of your screens, and State Road would be on the right-hand side of the screens. And you can see the existing building that's shown there. Sort of in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that this property totals 42,494 square feet. And I will move off of this slide and move to the next slide simply for the fact of showing that you can see, obviously, as you all know, you're familiar with the property, that all of the buildings and structures are located along the Rehoboth Avenue portion of the property, and the State Road portion of the property has all of the parking that was used for all the various uses that have been there, whether they be restaurant or the real estate office that was there. This second tab, that, as you can see, is simply a copy of a tax map that is an overlay of the aerial imagery for this area of the city. You can see the existing building that's there. You can see that it essentially comprises almost the entire parcel. It goes right up to the rear boundary line where the property abuts Scarborough Village. And then you can, of course, see all the various parking. One other thing I wanted to highlight on this aerial imagery was you can see, and you probably have experienced at some point in time when you've driven down State Road, that there is not a great deal of space between the entrance into the current facility and Rehoboth Avenue. And I'll come back to that when we get to the proposed site plan, but there's really only enough room there for about a car and a half presently, what engineers like Mr. Savage would refer to as the stacking of cars at an intersection. There really is no stacking, no appreciable stacking that can occur presently at that intersection. For purposes of showing this same image with the proposed footprint of the hotel, again, this is the same image as you just saw, but with the 4-story hotel, with the underground parking, the footprint of all of that shown on the screens. When the tenant was undertaking its review of this and doing some due diligence to look into what could be accomplished on the site, of course, it's shown on the screens in front of you, which is tab 2 in your exhibit notebook. But you can see that there is a line where it shows the split zoning of this property, which is the unique feature I referenced a moment ago. And all of the Rehoboth Avenue frontage and a portion of the State Road frontage is commercially zoned C1. And as was, I believe Mr. Mellon actually read the square footage into the record, but it's a little more than 23,000 square feet is zoned C1, you're commercially zoned. And of course, the R1 portion, your residential zoning classification, it's around 19,400 square feet, which is the, I'll call it the rear portion or the State Road portion of the property, which is all consumed presently with parking for that office building, what has been most recently used as an office building. For as long as anyone can remember, and I spoke with a number of people who have lived in Rehoboth Beach for many years, that is the configuration and arrangement of the property, with the building being located along Rehoboth Avenue and the parking being located along State Road. Nobody could recall any other setup or any other type of layout for the site. And I point that out because that means that for however long the Rehoboth zoning code has been in existence, and these properties have been zoned in this fashion, this has been a non-conforming use because, of course, the parking that occurs in the R1 area is a non-conformity. You can't park commercially something in a residential zone. So this construct is not something that the applicant is trying to introduce a nonconformity. As we'll talk about later when we talk about the split zoning, we're looking for ways to remedy that nonconformity and hopefully bring this property into compliance in a number of ways. Before we, I guess, get into the details of the split zoning, I thought it would probably be helpful just to sort of walk through the building itself. And just introduce the building as sort of a concept to you. The building is, and actually this is in your exhibit notebooks. This is, in case somebody's more color chart oriented, this is just the zoning districts shown in their various colors that they would be on your typical zoning map. Of course, you can see right along Rehoboth Avenue, you have all your commercial zonings, and then the various residential zonings that flow back from that as you step away from Rehoboth Avenue. The basic architectural site plan that is on the screens in front of you, as you can see, a great effort was made here to keep the overall layout of the site identical to what is presently there. And by that I mean the buildings stay where the building is presently, and the parking stays where the parking is presently. Presently, if you were to go out and count the number of parking places in that parking lot, you would find that there are 48 total parking places in the parking lot. When we get to the site plan for that portion, you will see that we're proposing 48 parking places under the hotel, and there'd be 44 parking places, so 4 less at the exterior where the existing parking lot is located. As you can see, when you look at this architectural site plan as well, there is the entranceway is actually, you have to drive through essentially the first floor, and the entranceway would be on your left as you do that. But one of the key features of this design is that it moves the entrance back to about 120 feet from the intersection with Rehoboth Avenue. And that's probably at least 3 times the present distance. So there will be a little more stacking that's allowed as people wait to turn onto Rehoboth Avenue. And I think if we had a traffic engineer with us, which I don't believe we do today, Mr. Savage is not a traffic engineer, but he can certainly speak to traffic concepts, and having more stacking at that intersection would make it a safer intersection and easier for drivers as they maneuver the streets, particularly obviously in the busy summer seasons here. The architectural site plan shows the various areas that are zoned residentially, zoned commercial. As you can see, what's proposed is for there to be 90 rooms in a 4-story hotel. The required parking is 92 places, and provision has been made for the 92 parking places that are required. There is a pool that is associated with this hotel, and we will look at that in a moment. And probably this is another elevation of the building from the architectural site plan. Probably the most helpful way to walk through the building is going to be, and all these are exhibits that you would find at tab 5, but I'll just start at the very bottom. This is actually a site plan, so this would be right at essentially ground level. That's the footprint of the building, and then there's 44 parking places that are shown on the screen as far as in the parking area, again, where the parking is still presently located. You would enter off of State Road, and if you wanted to go into the underground parking, you would drive around the parking lot essentially in a U shape, and then go to the underground parking, which is under the building, of course. The next slide is actually the garage parking plan. As I mentioned a moment ago, there are 48 parking places that are afforded to patrons of the proposed hotel. And you can see again on the far right of the screens or of the picture that is the ramp. And again, that's right by where the entrance would be. You're essentially driving underneath the entrance to the hotel. Moving up a story or a level here, We have the ground floor plan, and again, you heard the introduction. There is provision and space that's allotted for retail area, a restaurant area. There's a spa that's shown on the left-hand side. And you can see where the entry or foyer to the hotel would be sort of on the right-hand side. And of course, that's a person would drive in off of State Road there and could register themselves and then go to their room from there. The second floor is various rooms, as you would anticipate in a hotel of this size. At the far right-hand side of the picture, or the screens around the room, you will see there's nothing there, and that's, of course, because that's still part of the drive-through to give access to emergency vehicles. There has to be enough height for an emergency vehicle or fire truck to be able to make its way through the building there. The third floor, of course, looks very similar with respect to the layout of the rooms, but on the far right, there will be a pool that is in that portion of the building. And again, that is over the drive-through. The pool will be essentially over top of the drive-through section of the building.
Exterior pool.
It would be an interior pool.
Fully interior or shuttered or what?
I believe the plan right now is to be a fully interior pool.
Fully interior, okay.
The fourth floor of this building, again, shows the array of rooms for the building. And of course, the fourth floor would be the ceiling, or essentially the ceiling above the pool that's on the third floor. Of course, people always want to know what it might look like. So the next slides are architectural renderings. This is a view, obviously, looking across the street from the other side of Rehoboth Avenue, showing a little bit of the retail area, a place for dining, and then, of course, you can see a little bit of State Road there on the far right-hand side where the entrance would be. This is just an enlarged view of that same picture, showing us where the patio area would be, a little bit of the retail and dining area. This is a view as if you had come around the circle and we're headed towards the ocean on Rehoboth Avenue. Obviously, you have a State Road there to the right, and you can see where the entrance is, and you can see where the pool would be, obviously right behind the RG for Rehoboth Grand, and that's why I said it's an interior pool. You can see that it's intended that those pictures show it as an interior pool. This is a close-up of what the entrance would look like. And again, for instance, the car that is next to the people walking underneath the drive-through, if that car wanted to go into the parking garage, they would go around to the right, and then you can see where the fenced area is. That goes underneath the building and down to the underground parking. This is more of a bird's eye view from the right-hand side of Rehoboth Avenue. And this picture, to me, generally shows that what you can see is that the building layout was designed and intended to keep the building where the building is and the parking where the parking is, just as you would see it now with a parking lot on that portion of State Road. This is also a good picture to show the access point to the underground parking. Returning to, I guess, the purpose of today's hearing, having sort of walked through the basics of the hotel, one of the unique features of this property is that it is split zoned. And there's, of course, multiple approaches to dealing with a property that is split zoned. There are numerous concerns that are raised. I mentioned one, which is that even if it's just a parking lot, that's still not a permitted use in a residential zone if the parking lot is for the benefit of a commercial business. So there's, at the very threshold stage, there's a use question. And again, this is a use that has existed for many years. But there would be obviously, I think that Mr. Molina and his staff and Mr. Mandalis and the commission here would all struggle with any use of a residential property that is clearly commercial in nature. In addition, and there is some mention of this in the report that Mr. Molina provided to you all, the calculation of things like FAR and coverage becomes very complicated. Even if you could get past the threshold use issue, if you start trying to calculate FAR and you have a portion that has the FAR that's akin to the commercial zoning, and then you have the FAR that's associated with the R1 zoning, and how do you combine them for a use of this nature? There are many questions. It creates more questions than there probably are answers for that. However, as the commission knows, codes do allow for variances in certain circumstances. So one approach to this would be to come up with a concept, design it in more detail, as was indicated in the chairman's comments at the outset. This is obviously a preliminary sketch. While there are very nice pictures and drawings, this is preliminary. There's been no final engineering done. No agencies have approved it. If the concept went into some of those details and it was determined that a series of variances were needed, those could certainly be sought from the Board of Adjustment. From the applicant's perspective, there would be a host of variances that would be needed for a project of this caliber. And most zoning codes, and I believe yours is no different, and I'm sure Mr. Mandalis would probably support this notion, that would probably do a little bit of disservice to the zoning code to seek the number of variances that would be necessary for a project of this size and nature, to try to shoehorn it into various provisions of the code and try to see if we can't make enough variances so that you can be in conformity with those variances. Another option, of course, is to change the zone of the residential portion to match the C1 zoning that exists presently along the Rehoboth Avenue portion of the property. And it is our hope today that we'll have a discussion about which of those opportunities or paths is more desirable. I haven't made any secret as to where the applicant lies on that issue. Mr. Molina and perhaps Mr. Mandalis, I'm sure, will be commenting on those same concepts, as there would be a number of nonconformities, even those that exist presently, that would have to be resolved if the zoning is going to stay the same, and there would be an attempt made to see exactly how many variances and what the size and scope of those variances would be. The report that was provided from Mr. Molina, I know he hasn't introduced it yet, but I'll steal a little bit of his thunder here and comment on some of those things. As I mentioned a moment ago, Mr. Molina has done a number of calculations of FAR. He's commented on sizes of patios in front of the restaurant. There was the restaurant sizing and coverage issues. And those are all issues that I would not stand before you right now and tell you that I think the plan is 100% code compliant, because of course we're sitting on a split zone. There's a portion of the building that actually does go into what is the residential portion of the property. The good news, or what I thought was refreshing when I looked at Mr. Molina's report, was when I looked at the section where he addressed the issue of if the property were one homogeneous commercial zoning classification, it looked to me like, with a little bit of work by our architect and engineer, a little bit of fine tuning, that coming into compliance with floor area ratio, with coverage, that those were all very achievable things that we could accomplish, again, if this concept is something that can move forward from the commission's perspective. Code compliance does not look unachievable. There wasn't a great gap in the floor area. For instance, there wasn't a great gap in the floor area ratio coverage. Off the top of my head, I think the number, I have the math somewhere, but I think it was around 1,400 square feet, which, if this was a single-family residential lot, would be significant. But on a building of this size, while it's significant, there is ample room to find that if there truly is a 1,400 square foot overage on the floor area ratio, that can be found in the building and addressed appropriately. With that, that concludes my presentation and tour of this hotel. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we have these folks with us, the architect and the engineer, and of course the owner, or the tenant, long-term tenant of the property. And we're all available to answer any questions and discuss any of these issues as the chairman sees fit.
Let me just start off by asking one question. Give us a sense of expected timing for a project like this. In other words, when would you like to be welcoming people into, as guests? Are we talking a 2-year, 3-year? Give us some sense of what your concept is now.
I would say, obviously, as soon as possible. And as my sense would be, that's probably a 2-year process with respect to, obviously, this is a sketch or a concept, so there are many hurdles that need to be crossed. In addition to that, of course, all the final engineering and various agencies have to weigh in. There would be demolition, and of course, demolition, it has a limited window here, and so the timing of that, and then just the timing of the construction. But I would think that, this is probably very optimistic, but in the 2 to 3 year time range, obviously, the sooner the better.
Essentially, to be ready by the season in 2021? I mean, is that, when you were saying 2 years, I just want to, yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
You mentioned, oh, I'm sorry, Joyce? Use your microphone, please.
Could you just give me the boundaries? I walked over there, the Heidi Lowe's, the jewelry store is 326. Is all the vacant part 328, and this starts at where the building is? There's the auction house. Is that whole space 328?
If you look at tab 1, there's a little bit of space around Ms. Lowe's building. She essentially has your traditional 5,000 square foot Rehoboth lot, and then where the auction and such is, that is all part of this property.
Camp Meeting Associate is all 328? Oh, is that what I'm looking at? This is one.
Yes, if you're looking at the survey,
Yeah.
yes.
So it ends where the building ends now, the current building?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. There was no marking of,
It's right, it's very close there. Basically, the parking sort of runs right, the gravel parking area is almost right on the property line.
all right, and I just have one other question. On the roof, is there anything planned, any air conditioning units or anything planned for up there? Or is it, I'm worried about height, that's all.
That's a question that I'm going to ask Mr. Moneta to answer. If you could actually stand up and
Actually,
introduce
before you answer that, let me enlarge upon that just a little bit. You mentioned that all things being equal, if it was zoned the right way, the discrepancy is maybe 1,400 square feet or of that order, small order. But one of the things I noticed looking at these preliminary plans, which are obviously very early, is, for instance, on all of the 3 living floors, I don't see any service rooms. I've never been in a hotel that didn't have a service room for linens and things like that. So your ability to have all the rooms that you say, but there's no service room shown, I wouldn't want you to start adding on rooms to provide for that. And similarly, on the roof, I wouldn't want you all of a sudden to say, oh, well, we need another 5 feet or 10 feet or 15 feet for utilities, power, et cetera, et cetera. So and I don't see a second elevator. I see 2 ground floor elevators in the lobby, but I see no service elevator. And I've never really been in a hotel that didn't have some way of servicing those kinds of needs. So I know it's early in the design phase, but maybe you can address some of those kinds of things.
You
go up with this? Does this come through?
I'm not hearing it.
We have a room for housekeeping.
There you go. Yep.
Every floor has a room for housekeeping. There's a room, room, there's electrical room. Or guest laundry. That's provided in a hallway. Usually a hotel this size with this room configuration has a couple of domestic workers, shelf for linen, and they store the carts in there. So that's been planned for. As far as the air conditioning.
Excuse me,
No.
where is
Where are
the?
you?
Is it just the things that are already marked mechanical and electrical that would include that? You're saying, because there's 3 spaces.
Which one are you
There's
on?
mechanical room with the latest distribution of the common area heating and cooling. There's a housekeeping room there where we can put the carts in and have
Where?
linen storage. And there's something called guest laundry, which could be an electrical sub-closet.
I'm not seeing that.
We don't see that on
Yeah,
our
that's not
drawings.
on- that's not on
It's
here.
on this drawing
It's
here,
tab 4 in your notebooks, the second page of tab 4.
under tab 4.
Hang on, bear with us.
Okay. Mechanical,
Oh,
oh, guest
All
laundry,
right, okay,
okay.
all right.
It's not on the
Small
other.
one.
Housekeeping.
Yeah, it's labeled as
mechanical,
electrical on the
that's-
other
that's
one.
like a-
Yeah, I
Guest
got it.
laundry.
Okay, got it.
Okay, it's
And,
not on
and is
the
that
other
typically on every floor?
Mechanical, electric, mechanical.
one. That's on every floor?
It says second to fourth. right
Yeah,
there.
second to fourth.
Second to
Second
fourth?
to 4, okay,
On the floors with the rooms.
Yeah.
okay.
And it is an elevator at the end, which is a service elevator, or is that?
And there's also,
2 elevators in the main lobby,
Yeah, and then the one,
all floors.
and then the one all the way to the left is,
That's correct, there's one in the.
That's a service
far right.
elevator.
That only goes to the, I believe, the first floor. That's to get people from the hotel down into the spa.
so there is no service elevator to basically bring your services up to the floors? Okay. Okay.
Right here, you're proposed, or we're thinking possibly a spot is inside this hotel. Since the main lobby's here, to get people down and make it more attractive to get into the spot in the second elevator, which could be used for service. Along Rehoboth Avenue, right in here, this is the existing parking lot for the Ocean Atlantic building. And there's a space there where the access was. And then you have the meters set up as you're parking in there. We're proposing that we could possibly just call this a service space for a small, like van type thing that come in to service anything, without trying to reconfigure all the parking spaces. We thought that would be a good use.
And considering restaurants and I mean, and the entire design system, where's your trash? And is that trash protected? And how is that going to be accessed by service vehicles, et cetera?
Sorry, sir?
Trash, garbage,
We have a walkway out back there. We maintain 15 foot from the back property line. There'll be a privacy fence, and there's a back connecting walkway. Fire marshal's gonna wanna get back there in case there's a problem, so we did that. We have back entries out here, and we have located the trash up in this corner. We can do an enclosure, we can roof it, we can hold the odors down, and the noise, but everything for the thing with service here. And then that way we can get a trash truck in, empty it and get it out. That was our thoughts on that, where we located.
How high is the privacy fence?
How high is,
Yeah, the privacy fence. The height?
if we put a roof on it and enclose it, it'd be about 10, 12 feet. So they can go in and roll the carts out.
No, I don't mean that. I mean the whole thing. You've got a privacy fence around the whole exterior. I just wondered what height was anticipated.
The fence?
along
Yeah.
the back.
About 8 feet.
8, okay.
trying to be sensitive for the neighbors.
Right, that's what I figured, that's why I asked. Yeah, right, okay.
And we'll work some landscaping in and basically upgrade what's there right now.
All right, what about the air conditioning though, all of that, is that,
There will be some rooftop units, but they won't be visible.
yeah, but they'll be there.
They'll be higher than the
Yeah.
roof, though.
They'll be higher than,
It'll only be to service the common areas. Each hotel room has a self-contained unit.
right.
And then you have hallways and you have other things where we have some.
Okay, and you're aware of the height limit in Rehoboth?
They're allowed to exceed, I think mechanical's allowed to go over, isn't it?
Yes.
Equipment,
Yes.
Yes.
and they're not gonna be very big units, because we're just talking like quarters and a couple of service spaces. And they'll be in the center of the building, so they won't be visible from any street. And then the elevators will also come up a little bit higher, which they can't protrude, but we have those in the back and on the far side, so we're trying to keep those unobtrusive too. We want that clean look that you saw in the rendering, the artist's conception, we want to carry that through.
Thank
I mean,
you.
this is going to be one of the first things you see when you come into
Yeah,
town. And it's got to be done right. It's got to look really good.
How about the buffering between you and the R1 districts? You're required, if it's commercial, to provide some visual buffering, trees, fence, whatever.
We have not shown any at this time.
Okay.
Well, there is going to be fencing. We talked about
Yeah.
some fencing.
I'd like to add on to that question about the buffering. The parking lot appears to be about 4 feet higher than the neighbors, all the properties, the residential properties behind it. I don't know if the parking lot was filled in. The diagrams here don't give any indication of the grade change. So there's a wall all along the back and the side of the property that raises it up. I think it's almost 4 feet high. It's a considerable height, before any landscape or fencing would be installed. So we would want more details about that eventually. But I also wanted to express concerns about asphalt parking lots and their environmental value, I'll put it that way, to the community. Certainly when there's redevelopment, we would like to see environmental improvements, stormwater screening, buffering, that sort of thing, that are above and beyond what exists presently. And I realize this is early and the zoning is your main concern now, but that is something that I think needs more development.
Certainly, I know there's various methodologies that are used in parking lots, different types of paving that can be used to try to cut down on those things.
Let's take a break from this now and let's hear from Dom, okay? And then we can come back and continue on. Mr. Molina.
Thank you, Chairman Mellon and members of the
Want to speak into your microphone, please? Thank you.
I just want to thank everyone for showing up today. And my presentation is basically expanding on what Mr. Hutt has presented, because he has taken a lot of time to take my information and present it before you. But I just wanted to highlight some things that it's related to the existing condition of the site, primarily that it's a split zone lot. And it doesn't reflect that the project is not appealable, but it's reflected on the fact that there are conditions that I have to make comments on because it is an R1 and a C1. And we start with the site that, yes, the hotel has 87 regular rooms and three suites are proposed for a total of 90 There are 48 underground parking spaces and in the C1 portion and 44 surface parking spaces in the R1 portion for a total of 92. The storage for refuse, as was indicated, is going to be in the R1, proposed in the R1 residential portion of the lot, which is, again, it's not a permitted use. The C1, in the C1 commercial district with the underground parking is permitted as a Tier 2 use, and of course, under Section 270-13C2 and Section 270-21C2 as well. Approximately, you have an encroachment of 1,682 square feet of the hotel proposed to encroach into the R1 residential portion, and it's not permitted, and it's not permitted as a matter of right, as well as the surface parking in the R1. There is a use restriction. The interior of the hotel will offer a lounge with a dining area. A separate restaurant is also proposed, which is permitted to have a seated dining area and a bar area not more than 3,750 square feet. The restaurant area serving alcohol will require a permit of compliance. It should be noted that the proposed patio area is 1,121 square feet, and it exceeds the 750 square feet limitation by 371 square feet, or 30%, 33% more than what is permitted under Section 270-19B. The hotel is proposed to be 4-story, but I failed to see where I can actually measure the 42-foot height. There's no information on the documents that are submitted to reflect that. And also, the balconies facing State Road, it was hard for me to determine whether they're at a step-back angle of 30 degrees as well. The natural floor area, which is the most critical one, is under Section 270-21, the floor area ratio for all the structure, which includes the basement as well, because basement is calculated as gross floor area. The commercial portion of the lot, FAR, is times 2 is 46,134 square feet. The proposed building, when you calculate everything, is 65,385 square feet, and plus the portion that upon they would encroach upon would add it for a total of 67,068 square feet. There's an additional 16,335 square feet of underground parking and 2,344 square feet of drive-through space is also calculated as gross floor area for a total of 87,768. The permitted FAR in any commercial district is 2. Depending on how you do your math, you could do it as 190,000% that they have exceeded, or 1.9 over the 2 point that is permitted. And without a better scale drawing, the additional FAR for the drive-through portion, if it exceeds 12 feet, it would have to be calculated twice into what I have calculated so far. And again, those portion of the balconies are added as to the FAR as well, because it's additional square feet. Again, if the project was only contained to the C1 zone area, the permitted FAR would be 84,985 square feet. Even with this calculation, FAR could possibly exceed it based on the figures that I've provided, which come up to 86,403 square feet. And that is if you count the under drive-through twice. There is no information to determine the amount of lot coverage for the commercial portion of the proposed hotel, but based on what I'm able to observe is it's well over 50% in the C1 portion. And then if we get into the lot area per dwelling or dwelling units that's required under section 270-23, you are required to they are required to provide at least 300 square feet per dwelling. So if they're proposing 90 rooming units, that's 27,000 square feet. Based on the square footage of the C1 portion of the site, the hotel would be permitted only 77 units based on the C1 portion. With the proposed additional 1,682 square feet, they move up to 82 dwelling units. But combining if by chance it is in the wisdom to combine both zoning areas as one C1, the total of 42,492 feet will accommodate the 92 units, plus give them an allowance of an additional 50 rooms for a total of 142 if it can be designed to accommodate that quantity. Specific attention should be given as to whether the 3 suites which are not permitted with cooking facility based on the zoning definition of the dwelling units will have cooking facilities. So that question should be asked to the applicant if the suites will contain any cooking facility. And the hotel and ground parking area abutting the R1, R2 are required to have at least a 5-foot setback, and recommendation of landscaping should be taken under consideration. Based on the split zoning, the site appears to have limited potential for the proposed use without variance or complete rezoning of the R1 portion of the lot as C1 commercial. Again, the site, if developed, would bring in will help satisfy the growing demand for hospitality facilities in Rehoboth, and the development issues can be addressed through the permit review process. There has been there should be some emphasis on having a traffic study, because I see the area experiencing some vehicular congestion, especially when they have a proposed loading zone there and the entry and exiting from the hotel as well. And finally, there has not been any review for compliance with the hotel signage at this point. Any question? Yes.
But, Tom, any use of this property is going to involve this zoning question, won't it? I mean, if this is not compliant now.
Yes, it will, Madam Lazare.
Okay.
That's one of the issues that Mr. Hutt was raising, is that one option for them, rather than going to the Board of Adjustment and seeking variances, one option that Mr. Hutt was speaking about to deal with some of the zoning issues is, rather than going to the Board of Adjustment and asking for variances, that portion of the property, it's currently zoned residential,
Right.
could be zoned commercial, which would alleviate a lot of the issues that Dom's speaking of.
Well, that's what I was saying. We're going to face this at some point, yeah.
Do you want to, is now appropriate or not appropriate to talk about spot zoning?
We can talk about spot zoning, sure. Let's talk first just a little bit about split zoning. Split zoning, so everybody understands, it's where a single lot, so that line that you see on the lot doesn't create two lots. It's a single lot, but it's got two different zoning categories on it. I don't know how that happened or why it happened. I mean, presumably all of Rehoboth Avenue was zoned commercially at one point, and the piece that got appended to this other piece, we're not sure historically what happened there, but generally the law says that split zoning is haphazard. It's a presumption that it's done haphazardly, so the law favors cleaning up a split zoned parcel. Here, there might have been a good reason for split zoning it at some time, but we just don't know historically what happened there. as to spot zoning, there's always a question about whether something is spot zoning when it's a different zoning category than maybe the majority of the zoning around it. Here, this is a single piece that already has commercial as part of it. But as far as spot zoning goes, the only the objectionable characteristic of spot zoning is when you zone something to benefit a developer or a property owner to the detriment of everybody around it. Oftentimes, for example, if you had say you had some sort of an industrial use in the middle of a residential zone, and that industrial use was zoned residentially, a local government jurisdiction may then go ahead and zone that parcel industrial to recognize the use that's already there. That generally wouldn't be considered a spot zoning because it's a use that already exists and you're just recognizing what's there. There's an example that's cited sometimes is when Milton was looking to redo its wastewater treatment plant, there was a developer that offered land for that wastewater treatment plant if he would be given some relaxation of the density restrictions in a certain area of land that he wanted. So Town of Milton said, you can increase your density in this area if you give us that land over there to build our new wastewater treatment plant. That I thought was a classic example of spot zoning because they gave him a zoning relaxation that was certainly going to be to the detriment of the people all around it because it was an increased density. There was no, it wasn't consistent with any other planning they had done previously, but they wanted this piece of land to create their wastewater treatment plant and were willing to spot zone over here. It never made it to the courts, but I thought that would be a classic example of how a local jurisdiction was giving a developer a relaxation of the zoning restrictions to the detriment of a group of property owners, only so that the jurisdiction would benefit in some other way. Here, there's this land has been used, and I'm not prejudging anything because the commissioners would ultimately make that decision about a change of zone. But it seems that this is an appropriate application, I would think, to seek a rezoning simply because the proposed use is a parking lot as it currently is. It's part of a larger parcel that is already zoned, or part of that parcel is already zoned commercial. I think if you look across State Road, a commercial use wouldn't be entirely inconsistent. I think there's, the VFW there, and then there's Rigby's in a law office, and so I think there would be merit to the application if they were to seek a rezoning. They haven't made the determination yet whether they're going to do that, to my knowledge, but I don't think this would be. I think it would be a hard case to make that this would be an example of spot zoning. I don't think it would be.
The parcel's been split for a long time? I mean, it's,
As long as we know.
there's
Yeah.
nothing to say how.
Do we know how or when
Since we
non-conforming use started?
What was the question?
The question, I'm sorry.
Do we know how or when the non-conforming use on the R1 portion started?
I don't.
I don't, I couldn't
Or was
locate that.
permitted to continue, for that matter?
Could
Have you all done any research on that? Do you have any idea?
I did, and I probably sort of obliquely referenced it. I asked around to some of the people who I know who have been in the neighborhood with beach area for a while, and nobody could ever think of a configuration of that site where the parking wasn't where it presently is and the buildings where they presently are. And so as far back as everybody knows of the existence, all the folks that I spoke to, and that seems to be the configuration, and with the parking there, which is a nonconformity to the zoning code.
I'm aware of it going back 47 years, and it was a parking lot then.
Just maybe for our mutual interest, in recent years, at least since I was on the Planning Commission, I can only think of, there were two rezonings that sort of raised some of these questions. One of them was Oak Grove, okay? And in Oak Grove, they maintained the commercial property along Rehoboth Avenue, but the real issue was that whole Oak Grove area, which went back to Grove Street, to 6th Street, et cetera, was actually commercial. and yet it had totally developed except for two businesses. One was the antique shop, and the other one was the Canal Side Inn. It basically had totally developed as a residential area. So the commissioners saw, I guess, little problem in rezoning it, although Kirchhoff didn't like it because it put restrictions on what he could do in the future with his property. And so that's always a question. And the antique shop got it grandfathered. They didn't really care, I think, but basically it was grandfathered for that time. And the only other, there was one other rezoning. Oh, the barracks, the famous barracks, and the single piece of property on the corner were zoned, two different zones. Okay, one was on State Road, one was on 6th or Canal, I think it is. And there, no one could determine exactly where the split line was. And if you'll recall, it went to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment could not determine where the split line was. So it eventually went to court, and the court said, well, we'll determine it, and they did. So I'm not sure people were happy that. So rezoning or spot zoning, or whether it's spot zoning or zoning for a particular user may seem to work out in the end for that user, but you really have to be aware of what the impact is on the other people. That's all I'm saying. And I guess I would say, it's too early to say it, but I'll say it. I fundamentally am against achieving these designs by a series of permissions through the Board of Adjustment, that is, whether they be easements or variances. I think once you go down that path, then every square foot of what you want to do starts out as a conflict of looking for a variance. And I would rather see something happen where we essentially can comply as best we can with existing codes. The codes in the city were written for a purpose. And to keep ignoring the codes and saying, well, just if you want to do this, go get a variance, I think fundamentally is the wrong thing. If the codes are so wrong, then we need to revise the codes if that's the way the city wants to go. But I think it's far better to try and achieve a design basically within the structure of codes, rather than to do it with especially in this case, with a whole series of variances. So that's just off the top of my head for now.
I had a question. As opposed asking us to Glenn, the 99-year tenancy reference, does that have to do with like ground rents or something? What's the significance of, or does that have any significance with regard to that in terms of the ownership?
I'm sorry, I don't know the relationship there. So it's a 99-year.
It says in the introduction of
theirs.
of the document from the applicant.
Right. Right. So generally, the reason you'd have a 99-year tenancy like that is oftentimes lending institutions for this kind of project that's going to be of this nature and that large. They're going to want to see that kind of a equitable interest in the property to realize that their loan is going to be seen. They're going to see it through and be able to recoup money to pay them back. So that's probably the reason that's relationship. Plus, any developer wouldn't want to put this kind of money into a project and only have a 10-year lease.
Okay. Who owns the investment?
The underlying land.
Yeah, who end up owning the investment?
Well, that's a good, that's subject to their documents, which I have.
No,
I haven't
I'm
seen.
just curious. If it's on somebody else's property,
Typically, the improvements stay with the landowner.
with the landowner. Is that, you're hiding back there. You don't want to answer that one. Yeah, on a 99-year lease, Who owns, if you put this building up, who owns it? Does
think
Stein own it?
I think at the 100th year, I believe that typically, and I haven't looked at the exact lease to know that that's the case, but typically in real property law, a fixture of this nature becomes part of the real property. And so that fixture would belong to the Stein entity, this corporation, and they would have that, at that time. But having said that, I could address that issue next time, but I haven't looked at the lease to see if but it would surprise me if the lease said anything other than that. That's probably a better way to say that.
Typically, I mean, my experience has been typically that at the end of the ground lease, the building, the improvements revert to the landowner, unless, of course, there's provisions for extensions of the lease, or, I mean, sometimes it's 99 years with 5 20-year extensions. It just basically goes on forever, but otherwise, once the lease is up, you got to leave, and leave the building there.
And for example, I was involved with one recently, and what happened was the store that was on this long-term lease, and when the lease ended, their signage disappeared and the building stayed with the property owner. And then the property owner just had to go out and find a new tenant to occupy and run that business. But that's essentially what you see, and I think what Mr. Weber was describing.
And sometimes there's provisions in the lease where the lessee would have to remove the building, demolish it before, at the end of the lease. It all depends on how the lease is written.
And I can look at the lease and address those.
I'm just curious. I don't expect to be here when that happens. But,
We don't know where in the 99 years.
I had a-
I have a question. It's probably not it's not in the domain of our business, but I got to ask this question anyway because I'm curious. This is the second hotel that has come before us, okay, and you're aware of that. And yet, we have been told that the hotels in this city are running at about 50% occupancy, okay, which is somewhat below where one would expect a hotel to be able to make money. So I guess I'm curious why the investment in and we've been told by, I guess it's not the chamber, I guess it's Main Street is surveying the occupancy rates, and the occupancy rates of the hotels have been going down over the last couple of years. So what's the motivation for building new hotels? Is it to get a piece of the action that's already there, or is it the expectation that things are really going to change? I'm just curious. It's none of our business, except in one sense, that if it doesn't succeed, and then we have a building, a very extensive building, that may not be in the right place or the right time. So,
Well, I guess I would add to that the four-story aspect. I mean, what's the motivation for a four-story hotel? Along with your question.
Well, I'll add to that too. I wanted to ask what the dimension of the facade is, the entire dimension of it. I've looked at some other hotels to kind of try to figure out how it would compare size-wise. And if you look at like the Hotel Rehoboth, it's fairly narrow, but it continues all the way back to Lake Avenue. And the Avenue Inn is kind of the same way, and it goes back all the way back to Wilmington. And the Sandcastle's kind of the same. The only point I'm going to make is it's a big facade. It may be smaller than some of the other hotels, but it's going to appear bigger because it runs kind of parallel to the street, whereas the other hotels run perpendicular back to the next block in some cases.
Is there anything else four-story on that block?
Well, the Hotel Rehoboth's 4 stories. I think the
that's
Avenue
impressive.
Inn, the Avenue Inn's 3 stories, I believe.
Right across the street, there's a 5-story structure, and a long-time standing structure.
Yeah, the Arc or whatever, yeah.
Right.
Well, that's
Yeah.
why we have the rolling.
again, you may say, I'm not going to answer that, or, well, there's some portions of it that you might want to address. But I'm just curious that here we have 2 hotels that, and across the country, it seems like, quote, boutique hotels are the in thing today. I'm not sure what makes a boutique hotel boutique. I'm not sure that when Holiday Inn changed their sign, they did anything inside to make it boutique-y, but it seems to be a trend. And I don't know if you want to talk at all about that. This is a big investment for Rehoboth.
Certainly, as it's a big investment, as Mr. Moneta said when he spoke, this is something that needs to be done right, because when you come around the circle, it is what you will see. And Mr. Lockwood, in looking at this and doing some of his own studies, has determined that this would be a profitable venture for him and a benefit to the town. You know, one consideration that I think goes into something like this is, what are some of the alternatives that exist? And this is one of the uses. There's a handful of them in your code, but there's many uses that do not require any parking to be added in a C1 zone. You can just bring in a site plan and get some approval. And this is actually one of the uses where there is parking that's required, in this case, 92 places for parking. And so I think that's one of the things that was considered in this. Certainly, if you bring other businesses here and you have a use that doesn't require parking, I think a fair question that gets asked many times here in the city is, where are those people going to park when they want to utilize that or frequent that business? And so in this case, you would have parking built in for the occupants who are coming. But I would say it's like many things, it is a matter of some studying and examination of the area that was done, and that a hotel would be successful to the extent that it needed to be. And I haven't seen the report from Main Street, and I certainly, all the hotels around here, obviously, this is not their prime season of the year when there's going to be a lot of occupancy. But obviously the question is how full are you during the summer months, and then hopefully through efforts of the city and the chamber and Main Street and all those organizations, their shoulder seasons keep on expanding, so there's more folks who want to come for Sea Witch and all those other things, and add more weekends to the year. But I would say largely it's economically driven, that there is still money to be made and make it a profitable business. And again, with this, I think it's an opportunity. There was a number of nonconformities that Mr. Molina pointed out. One of them, I sort of jokingly said in a prior meeting, I think, that Mr. Molina was at, but the step back that exists, obviously there's a different step back that's required under your code for Rehoboth Avenue than for State Road, where that step back starts. And there's sort of an esoteric philosophical question there, which is, where does one street end and another street begin? Because you're at a corner, and so how much of that, how many of those balconies, how much of that step back applies off of State Road, or how much of that applies to the Rehoboth Avenue portion? But all of those things, whether it's the floor area ratio, the ultimate use of this, as was discussed, that any use that was brought in front of you right now would be non-conforming if it's going to be parked in the R1 area, or in this case, that that's where the parking is shown, as well as the entrance to the parking garage. And so this would be an opportunity to bring this into conformity, regardless, frankly, of whether it was this use or another use. But it would be an opportunity to bring this into conformity, and it's an issue that's going to have to be tackled, whether it's Limitless or somebody else, or the ultimate property owner. That issue is going to have to be tackled. But and we can certainly, Mr. Weber, answer or come up with some numbers and compare the size of the facade of the structure and provide that information.
Do we know, either the engineer or the architect or Don, is this going to require underground water retention?
I haven't gotten to that review.
Do either of you know that? Yeah, okay. And if so, what's going to be done to do it right? And
Sure. For the record, Carlton Savage, Scaled Engineering. Currently, right now, we don't have the full design plans together. We will have to comply with DENREX regulations through the Conservation District. They have guidelines set forward for stormwater management, erosion and sediment control. Sort of, you rely on those folks to do what they do. We provide a report back to Mr. Molina stating that we've complied with their regulations. In this case, we have done some preliminary borings, and we have great depth to seasonal high groundwater, which is why we're proposing a building. So there are options here should we move forward.
okay. Our experience with working with the agency is that until you can provide them with a final design, they're not going to look at it. So it's sort of out of the wrong order, but they may give you some guidance, but they won't look at it until you've got a final design and a final ground plot, and et cetera.
I mean, what I can state about this property, just basically what you're seeing, the configuration we're proposing is actually going to open up a little more green space than what is currently there. We have further setbacks from what's the existing property is showing. We don't propose to change the parking lot a whole lot. So it's a slight increase of impervious or non-impervious surface. That may alone comply with the regulations. So we'll have to take a look at that.
Next question, David?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have previously you just said in terms of if we looked at what Dom's analysis is, you'd have to end up getting just a whole slew of variances because of the split zoning. But under the assumption, if the split zoning didn't exist, what is the current nominal height that you're anticipating for the building?
41 feet, 6 1/8 inches, I believe. Guessing. No, plus or minus.
Well, okay, I mean, that's important because from the standpoint of variances, many times the starting point is a building that's much larger than what's permitted by code. And that in itself creates a whole series of problems, even if it was compliant in other fashions. In this particular case, I was going to say one comment I would make in the architecture is at the first level, one of the things on a main street anywhere in the country, whether it's Rehoboth or anyplace else, from an urban planning standpoint, there's a philosophy known as eyes on the street, which basically means it's really good to have a lot of glass that people can see in and people can see out. From the standpoint of health, safety, and welfare, and just general policing of the region. So I would say that's a positive. In terms of the aesthetic of the design, I don't make any comment on that because it's really in the eyes of the beholder. Some people would look at a building like this and say, wow, it's great, and others may look at it and say, God, that's awful. It's too square, it's too this, it's too the other. So I would just leave my comments to say with regard to the first level in the eyes on the street is very good. If it's height compliant within the code, and based on Dom's assessment, it seems that at this particular stage that, and I'm not saying, putting words in your mouth, but it seems that if it was a unified property designation, that seems to facilitate just about all the things that you're looking at the current time. And I'm just making that as a generalization, but it appears that that's the case at the current time. That's really as opposed to going in and asking for a panoply of variances, there really is this one code-setting requirement that if it was unified would make this proposal a lot easier. The only thing one comment you did make about where does one street end and another street begin, although it's not addressed in our code, but philosophically it would be important in this particular case is as opposed to geometric zoning, is an overlay of what's called form zoning, which takes into account the reality of space. So that to your particular question, where you have Rehoboth Beach has one set of rules, even under the commercial zone, you might extend that down State Street because it does take into account form and function as opposed to geometric zoning. And so the reality is that the net is you end up with a better space within the community. So that was my main question.
And
Oh,
if-
Do we have
if-
anybody in the audience that, public comments? We do. Well, let's hear from you. Please give your name and your address.
Mark Betchcall, 98 Sussex Street. My only concern is if you rezone the residential to commercial, it is always commercial. And the people behind that property right now have a 15-foot rear setback from that property and can expect only residential homes to be there. Once it is rezoned to commercial, what's to say in 5 years or 10 years, it's not another 45-foot or 42-foot building there rather than a parking lot that abuts their property by only 5 feet. So, and this is a problem with also the hotel that is proposed on Baltimore Avenue. And perhaps it's time to look at the commercial zone the zoning for commercial where it abuts residential. Because we changed all the residential zoning a few years ago, which is one of the reasons why this property, the property where ClearSpace is proposing to build, also the property on Baltimore Avenue, could probably never be residential, even though they're zoned commercial, because of you can't build multifamily homes. You can't build multifamily homes in Rehoboth. So once you've changed all that residential zoning, shouldn't we now go back and look at the commercial zoning, particularly where it abuts residential? That's my comment. Thank you.
That, by the way, is a subject that is on our bucket list for the CDP to discuss.
That's why.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Charlie Garlow. My wife Joan Flaherty and I live at 82 Sussex Street, which is the corner of 5th and Sussex. So we're your neighbors across the street on the north side of Rehoboth Avenue. And I would just like to say that we would certainly welcome a higher and better use to the property that's there now, especially the auction place is an eyesore, and we'd be glad to see that improved. We'd also like to recommend to this board and to the owners and architects and engineers that they endeavor to put their best foot forward as an expression of goodwill with their neighbors by having this building be the tops when it comes to environmental quality, such as making the building a LEED certified building, to have solar panels on the roof of the building, even perhaps solar canopies over the parking areas to lower your greenhouse footprint on this property. To have the maximum amount of foliage from balconies or from trees planted around various spots to handle wastewater in a way that does not burden the beaches, which is where rainwater may eventually go. So we look forward to working with those folks or having you work with them, where we can talk with them about some of the ideas we might share with them that they might voluntarily step forward and take. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Rich.
Oh, Richard.
No, I know I'm not in the audience, but as it relates to that, have you engaged in any outreach yet to any of the residents that have joined this property? To make them aware of what you're contemplating and what kind of reaction, if so?
We have not reached out to all the, like Scarborough Village and those. We are still, obviously, we'd be contemplating doing that and sort of wanted to get a sense of conceptually where we were on the project and how we're going to be moving forward. There is in my view, there's a fairly substantial choice that needs to be made by the applicant here as to seeking I liked the word that was used, so I'll steal it, the panoply of variances that would be necessary here versus seeking the rezoning. And once we have that direction, we'll be in a better position to reach out to people and lay out what the vision is, including the timeline that was asked about, and we can fit ourselves into the process that the city has, both for if there was going to be a change of zone application, if there was going to be a Board of Adjustment application, what those processes look like. I could be in contact with the city secretary and find out what sort of lay out what the chart the history or the course of this matter, the projected future, and help people to know, how they could be involved or comment. We received obviously comments just now, and hopefully get some feedback and learn what other people's concerns are, just as we did here today.
Thank you.
I mean, along those lines, I was going to say, first of all, I know that the coming before us for a concept review is totally optional, and I certainly appreciate it. I think it helps for all of us and for the audience to hear it at this stage. And I also know that the rules about concept review are different from site plan in that we don't have to notice the public 28 days ahead. And I'm just going to guess that the people at Scarborough Village probably have no idea until they opened up this morning's paper and saw on the front page 4-story hotel proposed for Rehoboth Avenue. So I think the sooner they learn about it, the better. But again, I think it's great to have had this discussion at this stage.
I had a question on it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is this, I believe this is certainly the largest proposed hotel that is the furthest from the beach. And that we're extending farther up Rehoboth Avenue with facilities such as this. And I know the hotel that was built several years ago, the Hotel Rehoboth, which is across the street and down a little ways, they seem to attempt to, at least what my understanding is, they accommodate their patrons by a shuttle service or some kind of service that would get them to the beach. And I'm wondering if you're anticipating something similar, being you're about a mile away from the beach.
Yes, that would be anticipated, that there would be some sort of vehicle to transport people with all of their chairs and other beach trappings to get to the beach, and then obviously probably some continuous loop to get people back.
Do you anticipate that would be shuttling them to the sort of central boardwalk area, or do you think you would be going out in the hinterlands, some other spots on the beach, or have some kind of means of maybe stopping at various locations along the beach or something like that?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know that anybody's gone that far with the concept.
Yeah.
But I know that given just the physical walking distance to get to the beach or the boardwalk, certainly the Rehoboth Avenue loop would be anticipated. As far as any other of the other streets, Wilmington or any of the other streets that are there, that I don't think has been discussed or decided as to how that would occur.
Okay.
I have a comment more directed at the architect. Years ago, when we did an we had a committee that looked at architectural review, which of course never went beyond doing that. But it was interesting because one of the things that we did learn and began to appreciate was how much for a massive structure like this, especially like this, how much varying texture and colors and changing of the facade in terms of texture can do to give it curb appeal versus no curb appeal. And I guess what I would do is urge the architects as they get creative and you get more serious about it to recognize this is a gigantic building, massive building. It's going to appear big, and I think anything that you can do to integrate it into the streetscape, if you like, of the community, to tone it down in a sense of not giving it this gigantic feeling, would be helpful. So, you're an architect, you've studied that, you know that, I'm sure. So very often it's not a question of really differences of money investment, it's the choice of doing it. And I would urge you to look at things like that.
We will, but we haven't refined to that point yet.
I understand that.
And I understand it has to fit the neighborhood, and I've seen it done well, and I've seen it done really badly.
Yeah. Okay. Where do we go from here? Well, yeah, let's just take sort of a straw vote or discussion amongst the Planning Commission. of variances versus zoning, okay? Two routes. I mean, we may have to follow both routes for a while. It's not clear which one would work out and what's involved, but we ought to have some sense of what the preference might be. Is that fair or
Well,
not
I mean,
fair?
ultimately, they have to make the decision based upon the legal standards that the Board of Adjustment would apply versus the legal standards that would be applied to a rezoning. I think a discussion probably from you as to whether you'd be supportive of a rezoning would be helpful to them, because ultimately, the commissioners would likely refer the rezoning request to you for a recommendation that oftentimes.
I mean, we certainly don't rezone. The commissioners rezone. But
They may ask for, the commissioners may ask for a recommendation from the planning commission as to the rezoning. They won't ask for your recommendation on a variance, obviously.
no, of course, yes. I guess the first question is a hotel, a structure like this, appealing? In other words, is the planning commission likely to support that kind of investment and go after it? And if they are, then we know we've got problems relative to meeting code, which is the best way to go. I'll tell you where I'm at. I think that if it's to go, I would prefer to see it go by virtue of zoning changes and to minimize pushing the envelope too far relative to variances. I think if you start pushing the envelope on variances, there's going to be a lot of headaches. It's going to be a multi-aspirin day, quite honestly, more than one day. So that would be my feeling. Other people?
David?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that this is, the property is an historical artifact of evolution. And although many of us don't like change because we're used to things as we've seen them the way they've been, this does create a difficult situation that I think the variance approach doesn't address the core issues at all, and in fact would be extremely detrimental for the future. The intent of the zoning is to nominally, in the public's interest, based on the comprehensive development plan. And since this is mostly commercial area, and the parking lot is, as we just talked about, everyone remembers it going back 40, 50 years, but they don't know why it accidentally happened or did happen. I don't know if Chappie Lehman is still alive in Colorado, but maybe we could ask him when his dad put the seahorse. Anyway, I think that is the most cost-effective and meaningful way. And from an engineering standpoint, it clears things up. But I would also say, if that approach is taken, I think that then, at least based on Dom's analysis, that a structure can be built completely within the commercial code and not require any variances, and that's my opinion, just my opinion as an engineer. But I would definitely vote for, I guess we're not doing a vote, but
We're not voting.
I would go along with, I think that's the best tack to take, is to seek a rezoning that makes sense.
I would support that as well, as long as there weren't, if we could not have any variances.
As long as what?
There wouldn't be any
Any
variances.
Yeah.
I would support that approach as well. I think it makes the most sense. It brings the property use that's non-conforming essentially into a conforming use for the entire parcel of property. So I too would prefer not to approach things with multiple variances, because I agree with David that is, creates problems down the road.
I would concur with what's been said. Also aware that at some point that property could have a building on it. And I think what's happening in the last few months is the, face of Rehoboth is changing. We've got three major structures taking the place of much smaller ones. And I presume you all know there's a demand for it. I don't know that. That's not. if it could be smaller, it would be much more appealing. But I think it certainly should be a zoning change and not, running back and forth. That's not fair to you, and it's not an effective way to do business.
My thoughts are that this is probably something the applicant needs to think through and decide how they want to do it. I mean, a rezoning, I assume, becomes kind of an all or nothing endeavor. If you don't get your rezoning, you have not, I mean, you're back to whatever you can do by right. If you go the variance route, you may get some of what you want, you may not get some of what you want. But rezoning is, like I said, it's an all or nothing proposition for the applicant. If they're successful, that's great. If it's not, they're back to two separately zoned parcels. And then coming back maybe after that for variances. So I don't know. I think that's probably a decision, kind of a business decision they need to make, whether they, and I don't know how the process works as it goes through. I guess the Planning Commission makes some type of, provide some information to the Board of Commissioners, and they ultimately decide on a rezoning. And whether they horse trade through the process or how they do it, I don't know. But so I guess my answer is I don't have a clear answer.
The only comment I wanted to make is basically is looking at the parcel, or the two parcels, let's say that the residential and the commercial. I certainly agree with all that's been said up to this point. My only concern is, in particular, with this particular type of site plan proposal, where we're abutting commercial with residential. I think that does require a certain level of scrutiny on our part as to what the effect will be on those residential areas. And I think in this particular case, the fact that the frontage of it, if you look at the frontage of it, and we see this sort of massive building, but that's sort of like the most exposed to the commercial area and actually not as exposed to the residential area. The residential area is the backside, which has less contact. Let's say you have Scarborough Village directly behind it, and then we have two residential houses that sort of abut the parking lot. And I'm just saying, if we did go the route of converting the residential to commercial, I think there should be some protections or something that we would articulate that would protect that in the future should this convert into something else in years ahead. But the way that Scarborough Village is situated, where the sides of it basically abut the property, I'm not seeing that to be that significant. I mean, I'm sure they will require protections, noise, odors from the restaurant, so many other things. But the way that that's situated, it doesn't look like it's going to be that egregious, or potentially egregious. So I'm somewhat confident that hopefully we could work something out, or in conjunction with the applicant. So.
And I agree with what everyone else has said. I mean, the entire proposal now is based on bridging two different zoning. So I think if the applicant makes up their mind that they're going to go for one zoning, I think we'll see a proposal that perhaps makes better sense, something designed without all those restrictions. And hopefully we'll have every environmentally friendly thing then folded in on top of it. So I agree with what everyone else has said.
I would also add something to what Monkey said. There is a tendency, I mean, if you end up with a set of rules, whichever zone it's under, of then sort of building out, if you like, to the limits of those rules. I would urge you to do as much as you can to develop goodwill and provide buffering, even if it means not taking advantage of all of the code allowances at the boundary between what will remain as residential and what could be commercial. I think, although we only had 2 people from the public today, I can guarantee you that you're going to get a lot more arguments, and they may not all be all that favorable. And so I would urge you to really think hard and reach out how you can provide adequate buffering between what will remain as residential and what would be this hotel and its properties. I think we'll all be better off if you do that, even if it means giving up a little bit on how far you push particular code in terms of setbacks or what have you. Everybody's got to come out as a win-win. Glenn, what is the process?
Well,
They have to make a request?
Right, well, I mean, under the code, you are, it says written comments, and sometimes we've asked the applicant whether they feel the need to have any form of written comment or if this is sufficient, and generally they've said this has been helpful and sufficient. And so I guess I would put it to you, David, do you want to see any comments in writing? I mean, you have this, not only do you have now the audio of it, you actually have your pretty face on the video also. You can go back and watch it whenever you want to, but we're happy to do it if you want something in writing, but generally it's just creates more work for us, and if you don't need it, we won't do it.
I don't think so. The conversation and discussion has been very helpful, and I took notes, and as you just indicated, I can go back and replay it if I want to look at some other nuance or point that my notes are unclear or I can't read what I wrote. Is the most likely thing to happen. And my client has indicated that he's fine with just relying upon the video or audio that's out there as well as, my notes. So that's no need to do extra work.
Thank you for that. Is there anything specifically that you all had hoped to hear from them on that you didn't hear from them that you'd like addressed?
I heard the discussion did answer many of the questions that I had as far as concerns that the commission may have. I'm going to actually ask my client if I may. Did you have any other questions, or Mr. Manita or Mr. Savage? Did you have any other questions? Again, I think the discussion was very helpful. So thank you.
Before you go too far, I would urge that you complete the examination with the fire and police so that you don't get yourself in a bind that all of a sudden you've got the public safety coming in and saying, you can't do that, okay? So before you spend a heck of a lot more time and effort, I think you ought to get that kind of feedback. And the question was raised whether it needs a traffic study at this point. We ought to think some of those things out where they relate to public safety, because you don't want to get caught down the road with all of a sudden somebody saying, you can't do that.
And one good thing about fire safety is that the fire marshal is, unlike Sussex Conservation District, the fire marshal is willing to look at plans before they're final. So we can certainly look into some of those things.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
very
coming.
much.
We
Thank
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. And we would like to make this as compliant for everyone as well. We think that's the best route. We're going to talk about it. We'll be back to you very soon.
Great, thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming.
You too.
too.
Get your snow shovel out.
Thank you.
Thank you. We spent a little more time on this than I thought we were going to spend,
Yeah, but I think it was well worth it.
but it was
Well
worth
worth
it. I think it was well worth it. Which leads us, where's my agenda? Leads us to, we've heard the building inspector. You don't have anything else new to tell us, do you?
It's too premature. What
Too
I told you is
premature,
premature.
okay. Okay. I'll translate that later.
Sure,
Premature, I'll translate that. So, which brings us to the CDP. I think, well, first of all, I'm happy that I think 7 out of 9 of us actually went to the meetings on Saturday. And I'm not sure how many appeared on Monday, but I thought that was good that we were there. So let me just talk a little bit, because we're not going to spend we'll spend a little bit of time on CDP, but let me talk a little bit about the current path forward. We've all completed, I think, thank you, various comments, okay, on the questionnaires that had been submitted by KCI. It's not clear to me, quite honestly, and I'm not sure it's clear to anybody, whether the next step is for us to do something with the comments or for them to do something with the comments. My hope is it is them, okay? So I need to check.
David, I had an email from Lauren.
Yeah, Lauren.
She couldn't open my thing. But and she said I wanted to be able to incorporate, could I do something? She wanted to be able to incorporate my comments in what they're doing.
That's good. So it sounds like
It sounds like
they're doing something. Okay. I would say, since all of you did not see everybody's comments, almost universally, all of us had, to varying degrees, this one major concern, is that what had been presented to us was sort of plain vanilla, standard issue, which had no relationship to us. I think everybody in one way or another said that, and everybody in one way or another gave it back to them and said, this has got to be changed.
If only we had some farmland to work with.
Yeah, right. Well, I even mentioned things like that, farmland and manufacturing and things like that. But I think those points were well made pretty much by everybody. Some of you actually just sort of checked some of the questions. Some of you edited some of the questions. So let's see where this goes, okay? But
David,
in my
could I
opinion, it's
just-
got to be much more personalized.
Could I just suggest, I don't think I'm the only one, that when you're talking to them, that they make the directions a little clearer of what
Yes.
they want. Susan and I talked, and you would have thought we had two completely different,
Yeah.
pages.
And if we include
interpreted
Tony
them
Sharp, that's 30.
completely. Okay, but they need to deal with us in a, I don't know
I
where they
agree.
get these things, but just at least so we can understand it.
I agree.
Okay,
We will
thank
have
you.
that discussion. Let me talk about, I put down city infrastructure. I want you to put your thinking caps on, okay? Your robe of
I
thinking
don't like
caps.
that.
You don't like that one,
No,
all
no.
right.
Two
You have a thinking cap.
Reminds me of.
We all were at the Saturday meeting, and we got an earful about infrastructure, okay? Sewer infrastructure. And I don't want to start on that road. I mean, enough has sort of been said about that temporarily. But the reality is that the infrastructure, whether it be sewer or water or a lot of other things, in Rehoboth has not had any major upgrades for almost 30 years. Okay? And that's not good. I mean, if you're an engineer and you're thinking about the life history of infrastructure, those are sort of approaching the lifetimes. And we're not necessarily there today or tomorrow, but if we're thinking, have our thinking caps on, and we're talking about 5 years or 10 years out, there is a serious amount of discussion that needs to take place relative to infrastructure, what needs to be upgraded within the city, and the amount of money that it's going to take to do that, and who's going to pay for it. And that all folds into who's going to be living here, et cetera, et cetera. So if you think you got an earful on Saturday, about the cost of sewers, there's a lot more behind that. I have invited Kevin Williams to come and talk to us in March. Okay? Kevin is the new director, I guess, of the Public Works stuff. He's an ex-Army Corps of Engineer guy, okay, that handled Katrina and things like that. He's pretty darn knowledgeable. He's quite knowledgeable about what the city has in the short time that he's been here. And I thought a discussion with Kevin, an open discussion, and I spent about a half an hour, 45 minutes with him, of talking about infrastructure, what infrastructure is at risk, what's the implication down the road of having to repair it, replace it, et cetera. That has a gigantic impact on planning, CDP, and I think it's within our domain, and it has a tremendous impact on how it's going to be paid for and what the costs are. So I have extended that invitation for March. He couldn't come today, okay? And since I won't be here in February, I arbitrarily said I'd like to be here at that time.
And he is available on March 8th?
And he's put it in his calendar to be here in March. Whether we have a regular meeting or a special meeting in March will remain to be seen, depending on the normal workload that evolves. So infrastructure, I want you to be thinking about that, okay? And what some of the questions might be and what the impact might be for the city, et cetera, okay? Okay. Even the question of do we have lead pipes in the city? And the answer is we do, okay? And so we've got things that we got to really think about. Code revision and updates and possible zoning changes. The subject came up here, and I'll just throw something out. This ought to be an area of discussion. We keep running into into the situation that we have a zone boundary on the back lot line. We've heard that on Baltimore, okay? We've seen it on Clear Space on Sussex, and now we're seeing it for this hotel. Maybe because the size of these structures, as Joyce pointed out, is getting bigger and bigger, even if it fits within code, maybe the boundary line, I'll give you an example off the wall, maybe the boundary line shouldn't be the back lot line limit. Maybe it ought to be the street. So that, for instance, take Clear Space, okay, where Clear Space as a commercial will border on residential, okay? Maybe that residential line on that side of the street ought to be commercial, and the street ought to be the boundary line. At least that would give you, 20 or 30 feet of open space. Now, if you were planning a community, you could create buffers, okay? We're not planning a community, but I'm suggesting that we need to think about the impact of these boundary lines between zones because the structures are getting bigger and bigger, and they're imposing problems that didn't exist before. And I don't think those problems are going to go away. So put your thinking caps on. We need to be thinking about that. Similarly, this whole discussion today of avoiding, making the code really be code and not have people circumventing the code by going and getting variances ad nauseum. I mean, there's always going to be variances, but they ought to be for the right reasons, not to essentially negate code. If the code is so wrong, then we need to revise the code and change it. If the code has value and it meets the values that the city, the people living in it, want to achieve, then people ought to be sticking to code and not avoiding it and not finding a way around it, which is what's been happening. If you look back over the last year, everybody that comes to us says, oh, I can build whatever I want. All I got to do is get a variance.
David, are you talking about things that would be in the CDP?
Yeah, that's the place to put it.
Yeah, because I mean, you probably, if you saw I had some of my crazy questions in there.
Absolutely.
for concepts that we hadn't even discussed before, but I guess they start in the CDP and then
Absolutely. So
evolve over time and.
I want people to be thinking about those things. Okay?
David, I think it's a great point, and that's one of the issues I just commented on to the applicant of the concept of form zoning. It does exactly that philosophy, where as opposed to Euclidean, which says it's here, it's here, it's here, and you end up with collision of structures that don't seem to make much sense. That approach to zoning, which is, I don't want to say the more progressive approach to zoning, but it really is, takes into account form and function in a greater totality, like the CDP. That it's not just what's good just for that one little piece, it's what's in the context of the entire area. And that's really what can make or break a town, especially when it's under the stresses like we are in Rehoboth.
So we need some thinking down those lines. Architectural review, commercial district master plan. I am totally amazed that every one of these property improvements that comes to us is sort of like a one-off. There doesn't appear to be any concise looking at a master plan. This is what the downtown area ought to be. I mean, we keep talking about redoing Baltimore and Wilmington. You know, and we talked, when we did the architectural review, we said we need to do architectural review for the commercial district, which was never done. And of course, the state has said to us, you ought to reconsider architectural review. The state did that in the pre-plus review. Okay, so that needs to be thought out. So I'm going to propose something, last thinking cap, okay? I know we've probably most of us are not all that enthusiastic about the pace at which the CDP has gone on. And if you read Stan Heisler's letter in the paper today, it's not a cozy, warm letter, and he's correct in many of the things that he says. So what I'm going to propose to you is we haven't got time to do it today, I think, but I want you to think about it. Let's assume that we set up 7 or 8 meetings, charrettes, whatever you want to call them, okay? What are the subjects? You tell me what the most important subjects are. Maybe there are going to be multiple subjects. I know that this sounds like anarchy relative to KCI. I also deal with a firm KSI, so I have a problem there.
You've been calling them CSI.
Yeah, well, and I also deal with the CSI too. So I'm willing to go forward, you know, sort of somewhat on our own and saying, if they're not going to come up with, you know, the charrettes and the game plan, it's our responsibility. Let's get going and do it.
But that means we need to do them this summer.
We need to do them, or spring or summer.
Well, but
Yeah, I'm looking to start as soon as possible.
April, May.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And let's pick the major
Pick the one
majors.
that's going to bring people to them.
That's
they'll be
absolutely right.
interested.
Well, I think we should also consider, in terms of the timing of some of these, depending upon the topics, summer meetings can be very good because we'll have a lot of people who aren't here full-time, who are property owners, who come here during the summer months. And getting their input in particular, when it's convenient for them, I think is important, both to them and to us.
I think we're probably going to have to adapt a little. We may have to have meetings at different times. In other words, they may have to be special meetings. Okay? You know, Friday night is always a problem because people are coming down on Friday night. So we'll look at that. But you guys pick out one. Each of you pick out one or 1.5 or something like that. Send me a list, and we will figure out a way to start setting up these meetings. Okay? We got to keep moving forward.
Do you have the list, David, of the ones that were before in 2010? Of the That would be.
I
helpful, 'cause They
can-
were very,
Yeah, I can, we can probably figure out what they were.
Okay.
I don't know if we can figure out all of them.
no, but.
Yeah.
Did each one have a specific topic? There was
Yes.
seven.
Generally,
Went
each
into
one had
different rooms.
either
Different
one
groups.
or two topics. I mean, I happen to remember the one where we talked with the biking community, and that was two topics that day. I don't remember what the second topic was, but you know, you talked an hour or a couple hours with the bikers, and they disappeared. They weren't interested in the second topic, and so we can mix and match that way.
Yeah.
These are critical things. I think one of the things that has puzzled me about the questionnaires and how we're going to put those questionnaires out, whether it's going to be on the internet, whether it's going to be on the portal, whether we hand them out at special meetings or what have you. I've got some feelings on where that should be done. But we got to sample the people, not only in the city, our residents and people that basically stay in the city, but because the city has changed so much and is being used by the surrounding community, we got to figure out exactly what the problems are and how the city is being used by the outside community. It's different now than it was 10 years ago. And it has an impact tax-wise. It has an impact cost-wise. I mean, we basically generate budgets to support the use of the city by all these other people that, in many cases, aren't paying for the use of the city. And we got to figure that out. We got to figure out if that's true or not, and then what's the solution if it is true, you know? So be thinking about those things as we go forward, and any others. Anybody?
Great. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I totally agree that we need to move on and have some of these meetings. You know, I was just actually thinking, though, that maybe we can meet the goals of both, what we were talking about here, as well as some of the things that Debbie File has said, because she talked about how we can't have the meetings till after the survey is done, because then you don't know what your topics are. But she only planned, I guess, I don't know, 3 or 4 meetings. And so I guess what you've said today is, you know, we know what the big subjects are. I think everybody probably does. In fact, there'll probably be overlap when we submit them to you. And that, you know, we can have the meetings there. And then once the survey, I think she's got that down, it's not even completed till August, things that come out of that can then be the subjects of the ones after that she's thinking of. So we could kind of serve both purposes that way, and, you know.
I bet you,
David,
I bet you 90% of them are going to be the ones
when you
we've already
do,
identified.
Please.
Yeah, when you do have a chance to talk to them and, you know, verify hopefully that they are putting together all of our comments into a meaningful form of questionnaire that relates to, you know, Rehoboth Beach. Are we, assuming they're going to do that, are we going to have another chance for us to look at it
Yes.
before
Yeah.
it
Yes.
gets finalized?
Yeah.
My understanding is, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We're going to have. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I want to add, just based on like the 3 items that you've listed here, I mean, one of the things that we have talked before, and you even spoke about it not that long ago, about the neighborhood preservation ordinance that we once had, and reviving that, which falls squarely under the need for code revision and so forth. So I would just suggest, as we think of other topics, also to break some of these apart maybe, and to maybe expand on them a little bit, you know, and maybe add a little granularity to, that's a big topic, and I think, you know, I would like to be able to discuss that more fully, so.
Yeah.
Debbie File also talked about who we're going to, like community groups. She said something in her presentation like, we don't know who those groups are, and you all are going to have to identify all these organizations. But she kind of moved on so fast, I didn't record it. I thought that would be in the assignment we already got. I assume.
I think she has some ideas
She
about
does?
that.
Because
Yeah.
I assume she wanted like, you know, like the lakes organizations and neighborhood associations, or maybe I just completely misunderstood what she was saying.
She included those. I think there was a general discussion, is how do you get this, who do you get the information out to?
Right.
And by what means? She was relying relatively highly on having it web-based, where people could log in, whether it, and I'm skeptical, quite honestly, after I see the length of some of those questions. I'm skeptical if people will spend the time to do that. My reaction is that if you have a meeting for whatever, a special meeting to talk about the CDP, that after you introduce yourself, you say, we're now going to take the next half hour. Here's a set of questions. Here's a set of pencils. Fill out this information. I think that's another way of getting the information. Certainly going to, whether it be chamber or going to the Main Street, homeowners association. I mean, these are the classic ones that you think about. We actually went to, when we were talking about the CDP, we actually went to Henlopen Acres and talked to the board of Henlopen Acres and anybody else that wanted to come. We did talk to the chamber. And so that there was a variety of ways of dispersing that. But basically, we set up the subjects and people came to us. And that was our technique. And she seems to be sort of shying away from that. She was saying, well, you go to, for instance, go to voting day. That was one of the things she said. Go to election day. Everybody's there during elections. I'm not sure election day is when they want to be handed a brochure to say, fill this out.
A lot of noise.
So, you got to think those things out.
More and more people are proxy voting, so you're not going to get a good.
Yeah. But let's get going on this. This is, all right, Glenn, we see Beach Walk is walking its way along.
Right. So as you know, there's basically 2 Beach Walk cases now, based upon some legal maneuvering questions the judge asked. The initial case was just a writ of certiorari appeal. That case is still out there. The city filed a motion to dismiss on that. So what's happened most recently is on the motion to dismiss portion of the case, which it's the city's motion to dismiss, the final brief was filed Monday afternoon this week. So now it's submitted to the court, the question of whether the case should be dismissed or not. The court will have 90 days to decide whether it wants
How many?
to. 90 days.
90.
Is the calendaring. 90 days to determine whether it wants to hear oral argument. Then if it chooses to have oral argument, it can schedule that, at some point, shortly thereafter. But then there's another 90 days from the oral argument for the court to actually decide the case. So it could be another 6 months before we actually get an answer on the motion. I expect it to be sooner than that. I'm not sure whether there will be oral argument on this motion or not. The case has enough, I think kind of interesting issues and atypical issues that the court probably will want to have oral argument. I'm just hopeful that it gets scheduled sooner than 90 days out. So there's that portion of it. If the city is successful in that portion of the case will then be dismissed. It's the city's declaratory judgment, or the city's declaratory judgment action. That's the second portion of the case. I suspect at that point, if we're successful on the motion to dismiss, the city will dismiss the declaratory judgment action and leave it sit. But we'll see how that all flushes out.
So it's
a
long way in the future.
The unfortunate news is that the wheels turn about this fast in litigation sometimes. And that's the unfortunate side of it. The fortunate side of it is that I guess I'm not sure that it's not really skin off our back, it's more skin off the developer's back. So I think we'd all like to see something happen with that property. So the longer it sits and dilapidates the way it is, the worse off we are. But that's the case. That's where Beach Walk is.
The post office has moved out, so the only thing that's really there is, I guess there's the surveyors are still there, I think, and the church,
right?
Resale shop,
right?
Okay. Next meeting. Right now, unless something happens relative to either, do we know what's happening on the appeal of the other hotel?
The appeal of the other hotel.
The other hotel is going to
the Board of Adjustment. Right.
And
So
is that Is that on a schedule? of
It
any
is on a
kind?
schedule that, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to mention that they were scheduled for the December Board of Adjustment hearing, but their architect who's in Florida was
Yeah.
tied up, couldn't make it at that time. So now they're on this month? Next month,
No, I was gonna
February.
say, I didn't
They're
see
on
the date.
February.
February.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And that's at the end of February?
End of February, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Fourth month.
So it can't possibly
Right.
hit us until
April.
April?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so the question, I will not be here in February. You're welcome to have Susan run a meeting. I guess we'll talk whether if you have enough feedback, some feedback on thoughts on CDP, then I would think you'd have a meeting and talk about that. Yeah.
That's fine, it's whatever, depending on everybody's schedule, what everybody wants to do. So we don't, think you have anything else coming before us? We don't have anything, Clear Space won't be back?
I don't think Clear Space won't
Anything else
be
will
back.
Okay. So we
And
don't
these
think-
guys, I don't think these guys will be back in
No,
that
They
time.
wouldn't have time.
I think it would be a good time to
So we could,
spend,
so it'd be
even
the
if it's an
CDP.
hour on the
Yeah.
Okay,
CDP.
all right,
that
so
would be
let's plan on,
See where we want to go or what
Yeah.
we've heard
We
from
could have
them.
like a workshop meeting.
yeah. So Susan, we'll get an agenda out on that.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I'll work with you on that. So,
Okay.
and are you the only one who won't be here? or-
Yeah, anybody else not,
Okay.
everybody else be here?
Okay.
Everybody else? Okay.
Unless you invite us to Florida.
Been there, done that. Okay. And there's no new applications? No new applications, interesting. Okay. Motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.
Hi, everybody.
Recording is still on.
Recording is off.
Recording is off. Now you can say what you want, okay?
You asked Dom and then you said, oh, we'll talk about that later.
Did we
There's
get
another
viewers in the
hotel.
thousands, Ann?